Okay, so my talk today is on RFID implants for fun, and you can use them for general security of buildings as well. So let's get forward. There is a content warning with this talk. It comes with the field. There will be some discussion of medical procedures, not a lot, just letting you know. No images of needles, I'm not going to be doing that. Some x-rays, just x-ray of a hand. So a little bit of discussion of that kind of stuff. And no medical advice. I'm not a doctor, don't take your advice from a 17-year-old. All right, so more about me. My name is Kay, I go by Kzone on Twitter, Dave M. I'm a student, I'm 17. I work at a small startup called McDonald's. And I'm a double RFID implantee. Get more into that later. What this talk is an exploration of RFID technologies and how it can be used in the real world for accessing your building, securing tools, cargo, whatever else, and exploration of implants and their uses and why they even exist. What this talk is not is medical advice, not a doctor. It's not a lecture on electromagnetism, because I don't know enough about that to do that. And it's not a guide on RFID access control. If you're working at a site where you need to install these systems, you need to migrate them, don't take my advice. I'm not qualified. So what actually is RFID? As you can see on the left there's a diagram that shows the tag and a device. And it uses magnetic fields to interact and share data and energy. I don't know how magnets work, so don't ask me. It stands for radio frequency identification. You can use electromagnetic fields, and there are two main groups of technology within this. There are 125 kilohertz, which is the older, not classical, and more common standard, and there's 1356 megahertz, which is what you might find on a transit card or something like that. What is RFID not? It's not a GPS tracking device. You cannot track a tag with any kind of precision from a distance like that. The highest you've seen is maybe a few feet from a big briefcase antenna. It's not a mind control device, shockingly. And it's not something they put in vaccines, I promise. So we talk about these two things called RFID and NFC. They're different but similar, and that's why they get a lot of confusion between the names. That stands for near-field communication, which is something you might have in your phone. Colloquially, we refer to RFID as usually the 125 kilohertz and NFC the 1356. It's technically not correct, but RFID is an umbrella term for various technologies, one of which is NFC. And NFC devices can act as a reader and a tag, so you can share data. So there are similar systems between two phones where you can tap them together and it'll share data between the two. And yeah, your phone might support it. It's a little out there whether it will. There are a lot of applications of RFID, NFC, all that. One of which is access control. That's the really big one. There's asset tracking. So you might have a lot of stock moving through a warehouse. You might have a bunch of tools that you want to keep track of, where they've been. And another big one is casino chips. They'll often embed tags inside a chip to check if it's a real one or if it's been altered in some way. They're also in passports. If you have a recent New Zealand passport, it probably has a little logo on the bottom. That's an e-passport. That's how the fast access things work in security at an airport. They're for payment, which is very relevant in the past few months. So you can tap your phone, tap your card, and not have to contact the actual PIN pad. Used for animal identification, so you might have your pet or something like that will have a chip just installed in its back usually, and that'll help a vet identify them. Fashion is a new one. There's bracelets, earrings, rings that you can get that have NFC chips in them. Human implantation is the very weird one that we're going to be talking about today a little bit, just later. More on access control. So that's just controlling access to a building by an RFID tag. The big one is ProxCard 2. That is the older one that is pretty much ubiquitous everywhere. Any reader that supports a modern technology often still supports ProxCard. iClass is a more recent one, which is a little more complicated. It's a high-frequency card. There's MyFare, which is the kind of thing you would usually see on a transit system. If you've been using the Christchurch Metro, that's a MyFare card. And there are also cards that just use UIDs from the tag itself to identify them. So nothing special going on, it's just the ID. ProxCard 2 is highly common. It's low frequency. It has a very simple data format. It's usually referred to as weekend. It's a little bit of a misnomer, but that's the term people use. And it's easily cloned, so you can do drive-by cloning, things like that. There are about 16.7 million combinations of different cards. You can see on the right there, that's the diagram. So there is an 8-bit facility code and a 16-bit card code. So it's 16.7 million possible ones of those. iClass, it is encrypted. It is only readable by specific readers because they'll have to decrypt the card when it's read. There's more storage space on the cards, so you might be able to store contact details, something like that. It's more secure than ProxCard 2. Can't be drive-by cloned until somebody dumps the master key, in which case it can. Then MyFare, it's a family of technologies owned by a company called NXP. They do a lot of NFC. They're all 1356. They're typically found in transit systems, as I said before. And they're used by all of the Canterbury Metro systems. So Timaru, Christchurch will use a MyFare card. They're primarily two ones called Classic and Desfire. We'll get into those. And these various encryption schemes. MyFare Classic is the old one. It's from around 1994. It was first used for transport in Seoul in Korea in 1996. And it has a proprietary encryption algorithm called Crypto 1. And as we all know, they're very secure. It was broken around 2009, probably a bit earlier. They can be easily cloned these days with some pretty cheap tools. And they're originally used by the Timaru Metro, but they've been invalidated recently because of those problems with them. Desfire is the more secure one. Around 2002, they had revisions in 2006, 2016, and 2020. They use triple des on the card. And the original one was broken in 2010 by some complicated side channel attacks. I don't really know them. There are some good papers you can read about that. And the EV2 replaced MyFare Classic in the Timaru Metro. The Christchurch Metro typically uses EV1s, I think. And the next one is passports. So that's the passport logo you might see on a recent New Zealand passport. They're called e-passports. They run a Java card applet, so yes, your passport runs Java. And they're defined by the International Civil Aviation Authority. So they define the standard, what chips you use, what's stored on them. They have various attacks against them. There's been some problems where their readers at airports aren't checking any hashes. But next up is payment cards. There are small prepaid card companies that are doing this. They're pretty small. They often have large fees. It's a hard field to get into. The big ones are Visa, PayWave, MasterCard contactless, Google Pay and Apple Pay on your phone. But these all share a sort of consortium called EMV for Europay, MasterCard, and Visa. They're the ones who are defining the standard. They're pretty much impossible to get a foot in the door in the game, though. There's a few companies working on implants for them, but the problem is dealing with MasterCard Visa is extremely difficult. They often use triple des as well. And animal implants, that is one of the x-rays. You can see they put it just above the skin on the back usually, or below it. They're used for vets to identify a pet. It stores a registration number that can then be linked back to the owner through a national database usually. They use 125 kilohertz or 134, the latter of which is usually called FDXB. It has a custom data format that is a little complicated. There are multiple standards for them. They're not really ubiquitous. It depends on the region you're in. They have much in common with human implants, as we'll get into. Fashion is an interesting one. It is, in fact, a thing. We have RFID wristbands that were used at festivals that can tell if you're allowed to be there, if you're allowed to drink, similar to that. NFC rings that just go around your finger. You can tap them, share your Twitter or something like that. And you have earrings, which I'm actually wearing right now here. That is just an LED that when it comes near a RFID field, it will glow. And the main tools we use for this kind of stuff on the right is called a Proxmark 3 RTV4. It is a general purpose RFID tool. You can do pretty much anything you would need to do for it besides very complicated attacks. It can sniff, clone, and emulate tags. So if you can drive-by clone someone's work badge and then you can emulate it. And there's various different types of Proxmark hardware available. The RTV4 is a few $100s. You can get cheap ones from AliExpress that are sort of simpler, but they work just as well. Human implants, the big one. Most popular technologies in the RFID space have an implant available that you can buy. They're not particularly invasive, it depends on your definition. Usually they use a rather large needle and they're injected into the hand. There's a wide variety of options between injections. You can get flat flex chips that have to be installed more invasively. There are very few vendors that do this. The problem is finding someone that's reputable and checks their supply chain. Typically, they are a cylindrical coil that is encased in some bioglass by a company called Scott, I believe is how you pronounce it, that is only very slightly interactive with your skin. They're useful in the right circumstances. If you have sort of a workplace that has badge readers and you're real good friends with a security guy, you might be able to get one of these registered and get into your workplace with one. They are harder to clone, but that is only because the distance required to read one is a lot closer. My implants, what I have in my hands right now, are one implant in each of my hands. They are an XEM, which is 125, an XNT, which is a 1356. I did them myself in March, just before lockdown. Do not do this. Do as I say, not as I do. The company that makes these will tell you the same thing. If you can get a professional to do it. They're similar in size to a grain of rice, pretty big grain of rice. And they're injected between the first and second metacarpals in your hand, just here. I don't have many uses for them. I'm not at a workplace where I have a badge reader to get into my building, so pretty much I just have my Twitter on one of these, which you can ask me about later if you want to. The options are usually from dangerousthings.com. This is not sponsored. I wish it was though. Most technologies they have an implant for. The NEXT, which is a combination of high frequency and low frequency in one chip, and they can emulate a lot of low frequency cards. The XNT and the XEM that I have are the same thing. They're split into two different chips. The XDF2 is a MyFair Desfire EV2 that has 8 kilobytes of storage on the chip, so you can store your whole CV probably and a few bit more. The XM1 is the MyFair Classic that has 1K of storage. It can also be modified to change the UID, which you're not supposed to be able to do, but some companies in China do it anyway. There's also the Spark 2, which is an implant that can do AES 128 in vivo, and it can do some two-factor authentication, usually only through VivoKey's specific platform. Coming soon, though, is the Apex, which is a general smart card chip. Oh, sorry, I thought it was me. It can generate 2FA codes because it just runs Java card applets. So soon your hands can run Java. The process of purchasing one of these, like I said, there is very few reputable vendors. The main thing is dangerousthings.com. They ship globally, not sponsored. They will ship to New Zealand for free, over $150, I think. Sometimes you can get these at conferences. So big conferences like DEF CON, they'll often have a table with some guy who's like, if you buy this, I'll put it in for you. It's a little bit sketchy, but you know. Animal chips are usually very cheap. They're encased in an adhesive, sort of a biobond. Do not use these. They will stick to your skin almost permanently, and it's incredibly difficult to get them out. I don't know that from first-hand experience, but I know people who do. Do not buy these from AliExpress. That might seem obvious, but it is what it is. You can see on the right there, there's a strange contaminant leaking out of an AliExpress chip. I don't think anybody knows what that is, but it's not good. They're also completely potted on the inside. Most good quality chips are only slightly adhered to the glass. Installing one of these is pretty complicated in New Zealand. Most implants have a 3mm diameter needle. That sounds pretty big. It's pretty big. They're typically injected between first and second metacarpals, like I said. They're not particularly painful, probably. It's very dependent on who you are. Personally, mine were easier than ear piercings in my experience. It could be completely different for you. They should be done by a professional. You can often get piercers to do these for you, and you have to be very good friends with them. Dangerous Things has a list of professional installers on their site. Like I said, piercing shops might agree to do it. You have to ask them. It's a bit touch and go whether they will. And the uses of these implants. Anything a regular RFID tag can do, you can use one of these for it. You can unlock RFID-enabled doors at your workplace, wherever else you might be. Unlocking computers with a dedicated reader that you can see on the right. That is, basically it'll read the UID from the chip and it'll spit it out as keyboard input. You can also send your contact details by NFC. Like I said, I have Twitter on mine, so you can just scan it and it'll bring up my Twitter on your phone. You can also do 2FA with some chips. It's mostly a novelty. It's pretty interesting to do 2FA on your hand though. And physical pen testing jobs, they have a really interesting application in that. Deviant Olaf, if you know who that is, a big American hacker, he had a story where he was on a job where he cloned a guard's badge that would have given him access to the entire building. So what he did is he kept his guest badge on him, and when he walked up to a reader, he had his guest badge in his fingers, and he went like that to tap it to it. And on all of the cameras, it looked like he was using his guest badge to get into the server room. He was not. So just to close up, RFID is a ubiquitous and incredibly useful technology. It's used everywhere. There's various levels of security for your different applications. I didn't mention it before, but there's ultra-high frequency chips as well. Those will be used in warehouses. That is one of the big ones where security isn't really a huge concern for that because you're tracking stock moving around. Implants are an interesting way to get into your workplace. The security guy might not like it, but it is what it is. The government is not putting chips in vaccines. I promise you, we're not. Thank you. It's been me.